Hello, fellow psychology students. Today we'll be talking about social psychology. And the main question is, how does the presence of others affect the way people think and behave? Well, social psychology is a scientific study of how social interactions affect what you think and what you do. When trying to understand why a person does something, you have to ask yourself whether they did it because of their personality or whether they did it because of the situation. The attribution theory that is credited by Fritz Heider states that people usually attribute others' behavior either to their internal dispositions or to the external situations. But how do you distinguish between both? For example, if you were at a birthday party and saw Billy sitting in a corner all by himself and thought, hey, that kid must be extremely shy. What if usually Billy is very social and talkative, but last night his dog died, and so his mom forced him to go to the party, which she didn't even want to go to in the first place? This is where the fundamental attribution error theory comes in, that states that observers overestimate the impact of personality while underestimating the impact of the situation. This often leads to people creating certain ideas about how people are that can be completely wrong. In the 1970s through the 1980s, Richard Petty and John Cacioppo came up with the central route persuasion theory and the peripheral route persuasion theory that deal with the action of persuading people. The central route theory focuses on facts and the content of the message in order to convince the listener, while the peripheral route persuasion theory focuses on the basis of physical attractiveness, background music, or other surface-level characteristics. For example, you might be watching an advertisement on donating to a mental illness organization and decide it's worth your time to donate because according to the advertisement, the money would be going towards new research to help people suffering a mental illness live a better life. That is the central route persuasion theory being applied. On the other hand, you might be watching the same advertisement that you were and you decide to donate because the lady on the screen is very attractive to you. That is now the peripheral route theory working. Now, when dealing with compliance, there are two techniques known as the foot in the door phenomenon and the door in the face phenomenon. The foot in the door phenomenon is credited to Friedman and Fraser in 1966, and this technique states that people who have first agreed to a small request have a tendency to comply later with a larger request. For example, Josh asks his mom for $10 so he can go have lunch with his friend, and his mom agrees to this, and then when Josh is leaving the house, he asks his mom for $30 because they're also stopping at the arcade, and his mom ends up agreeing to pay for Josh's leisure activities for the day. The door in the face phenomenon is credited to Cialdini in 1975, and this technique states that people who won't agree to a large task have a tendency to then agree when a smaller request is made. For example, Jim is asking Will for a donation of $100, but Will doesn't have $100 to spare and feels bad, so when Jim proceeds to ask for a $5 donation, Will accepts this. A famous study that proved the influence of power and corruption still has significance today because it supported how a situation can override the personality of a person. This experiment, known as the Stanford Prison Experiment, was performed by Philip Zimbardo in 1971 by using students as prisoners and guards. The volunteers were assigned randomly to their role after screening 70 applicants and selecting 24 male college students. The experiment was planned to last 14 days, and each of the 24 students were paid $15 a day for participating in the experiment. Zimbardo wanted to observe how each person adapted to their role, and the guards became very harsh and hostile towards the prisoners. The guards even began harassing the prisoners, and eventually the prisoners began telling tales about things that had occurred with each guard and behaved as if they should be treated with cruelty. The experiment was terminated after 6 days because the students took on their roles how they thought they should and believed that their prison environment was actually real. So why are people more willing to conform to negative activities and to take on the positive activities? Well, Leon Fessinger's theory of cognitive dissonance refers to a situation involving conflicting attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. This produces a feeling of discomfort, leading to an alteration in one of the attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors to reduce the discomfort and restore balance. For example, you are known to be an honest person about absolutely everything, but one day, your teacher tells you to stay after class and asks whether Will cheated on his test. By the way, Will happens to be your best friend. You decide to tell your teacher that Will didn't cheat, even though you know he did. According to fasteners theory, you know you've lied even though you never lie, but you blame it on the fact that you couldn't get your best friend in trouble, and so this resolves your internal tension because you've changed how you view the situation. Reducing the internal tension lets you keep thinking that you are an honest person. So what might cause a person to sway away from their personal conscience? The answer to that is obedience to authority, and this is proven through the Milgram experiment in 1961. Stanley Milgram wanted to investigate whether Germans were particularly obedient to authority figures, as this was a common explanation for the Nazi killings in World War II. As to the experiment, 40 male volunteers that responded to the newspaper advertisements participated in it. Each one of them was introduced to another participant that was actually a confederate of the experiment. They would then pick straws to decide who was the teacher and who was the learner, but this was fixed so that the confederate was always the learner. An actor was paid to play the role of the experimenter. The learner was placed in a room with an electric chair where he was strapped to, and the teacher and experimenter were in the room with the electric shock generator, which was fake. The learner was given a list of word pairs that he was supposed to memorize, and then the teacher would test him by saying a word that the learner would have to pair with the word from the list given earlier. The teacher is told to administer an electric shock every time the learner makes a mistake, increasing the level of shock each time. There were 30 switches on the shock generator marked from 15 volts, which was labeled as slight shock, to 450 volts that was labeled as danger or severe shock. The learner gave mainly wrong answers on purpose, and for each of these the teacher gave him an electric shock. The results concluded that 2/3 of participants or teachers continued to the highest level of 450 volts. All the participants or all the teachers continued to 300 volts. Obedience to authority is ingrained in us all from the way we are brought up. Now, people do conform to authority, but do they conform to social groups too? Well, the answer is yes. Conformity is a type of social influence involving a change in belief or behavior in order to fit in with a group. People tend to conform to groups if they feel insecure about their opinion, if there are more than 3 people in the group and all of them agree to the same opinion, if they admire the group, if they feel like they're being watched, and if their culture expects certain things from them. And that wraps this video up. Thanks, guys.